but I'm wondering, is there a relationship between our attachment styles and our subconscious? Are they related?
Yes.
Because I know
So,
that's like a main vein for you too, and I'm wondering there must be a connection, since these
yes.
are two of the things you've really drilled deeply in, right?
Yeah. So when I first started working with clients, I started working with clients and seeing way too many clients per week. I had to work on my boundaries early on there too. But I would see like 35 or so people a week. And I first started working with people on a few core things. So I would, when people come in, we'd recondition their different belief patterns, right? These old core
Mm-hmm.
wounds. We do that auto suggestion work, use other reprogramming tools. That's one of, about 20 or so major tools that are out there that are solid. And then we would work on them understanding their unmet needs, learning to actually meet those needs in the relationship to self, essentially almost like reparenting, using their conscious mind to understand what needs were missing from childhood to give those needs in the relationship to self. And then we would do the nervous system work for emotional regulation purposes, right? So we started there. And then, I would then get people to go and communicate those needs to other people, right? Because now that I know my needs, I have to get them met by other people. And I would also work with clients on reestablishing their boundaries. And so, funnily enough, as this theme kept coming up with people's relationships, and I kept ending up, working with people on their relationship dynamics. And I was always working with people in these major categories first: the core wounds, the needs, the emotional regulation, the actual boundary work, the communication, and then also upgrading old coping mechanisms, right? The behaviors. Because what we'll see is like there's no actual such thing in our lives, in my opinion, as like self sabotage.
Hmm.
What we experience as self sabotage or procrastination is actually our conscious mind intending something and our subconscious mind having a different set of needs, right? Our conscious mind can say, I'm going to sit down and finish the paper. And our subconscious mind can say, yeah, but you have unmet needs for social connection today. So while you try to sit down there, I'm going to keep diverting your attention to scroll through
Hmm.
social media and see what people are doing, right? So we have this like friction between our conscious and subconscious, and that's actually what procrastination or self sabotage are. But
Ah.
anyway, to stay
Okay.
on track, so we have these six major areas. And then when I started digging more into attachment theory, and of course, like learned all about attachment theory, like first year university, but it was such
Mm-hmm.
a high level, like it was not very, very in depth. And then going back and working through some of those things, what I found that was so wild to me is how these different attachment styles had these exact same patterns, like 95% of the time, with similar core wounds,
Hmm.
similar unmet needs from childhood, similar emotional patterns they struggled with, similar boundary issues, communication issues, and coping mechanisms.
Ah.
And so what I found is that when I was working with people on these different subconscious dynamics, that actually what could happen is when I would start understanding somebody's attachment style, I knew like, okay, if they're anxious, preoccupied, their wounds, their core wounds are going to be around a fear of abandonment, being alone, being excluded, being not good enough, being unlovable, being unsafe when somebody pulls away from them, right? They have this panic sort of nervous system dynamic. And I knew that their unmet needs from childhood were going to be around that consistency, that safety, that connection that was reliable. And so and we can go on, but there was certain core wounds, certain unmet needs, certain emotions they would feel, like anxious preoccupieds will feel a sense of being panicked or afraid, or a sense of sadness, loneliness. And you'll see that's very different from a dismissive attachment style in terms of the core wounds, the needs, the emotional patterns. Anxious preoccupied struggle all the time with their boundaries. They're boundaryless. They're big people pleasers. They tend to have no relationship to being able to communicate their needs to others. They communicate in the negative. So they'll say, you never do this, instead of, hey, I really could use some support. Can
Hmm.
you do this? Right? They communicate reactively rather than proactively. And their behavioral coping mechanisms are activating strategies to try to maintain proximity, to call a lot, text a lot, cling. And so, interestingly enough, what I found is these six major things I would work with clients on before even looking at attachment theory or anything related, they actually boiled down to these six major areas. And one of the things that I thought was kind of missing from an attachment theory perspective was there was a lot of beautiful discussion around it and a lot of like understanding of temperament and patterns, but there weren't tools for how do you change it? How do you reprogram it? How do you heal it? And so what I started working with people on specifically was actually learning to recondition their attachment style by reconditioning core wounds, meeting their unmet needs, emotionally regulating through that nervous system work, and then digging into better boundaries, better communication, and a change in coping mechanisms. And all of those things can be reprogrammed at the subconscious level to create new patterns. And those are exactly exactly the 6 things that we need to change in order to become securely attached. And so that's where integrated attachment theory came from.
Wow. That's great. It's great to understand that the common thread between like negative core beliefs, right, in our subconscious are so closely tied to our attachment style through the unmet needs,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that our attachment style, unless it's what secure attachment, like a lot of the maladaptive behavior is an attempt to get those needs met in a way that we learned maybe growing up that wasn't so effective, right? Or maybe it's a compensatory behavior,
Yeah.
right? That we're
Exactly.
trying to overcompensate for something, like you said, maybe with the anxious avoidant, right?
Yeah. So you can see, for example, like anxious preoccupieds, a lot of their
Anxious
core
preoccupied,
wounds.
excuse me.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yeah,
Absolutely.
a lot of their
Yeah.
their wounds and their fears are about like abandonment, being alone, being excluded, being disliked, rejected, unloved. Whereas it's funny because if you see a dismissive avoidant on the other side of the sort of attachment continuum, in a sense, dismissive avoidance, like their core wounds are not around that. They have a core wound of being shamed. There's this deep core wound of feeling like I am defective or something's wrong with me, of being not good enough or incapable, of feeling unsafe at a low level. You'll see a lot of that being in there as well. But you'll see a lot more around feeling trapped or helpless or powerless, or a sense of not belonging. So the wounds are different, right? And when we can understand somebody's attachment style, we're like, oh, we know what wounds we have to reprogram to help you become secure. Also, you'll see with dismissive avoidance, like totally different needs, like you said, right? Than an anxious preoccupied that are unmet. And so we know, okay, you have to plug into meeting these needs for yourself as an adult in order to be able to form secure and healthy relationships. And so by doing all that work, but applying things in a way that's allowing for reprogramming to happen, like that repetition and emotion on a daily basis, we can actually rewire our attachment style in order to become secure.
I imagine it really helps to know what you're targeting.
So much.
As a
Yeah.
counselor, sometimes I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole, because so many things, whack-a-mole, that old Chuck E. Cheese
Yes,
game where you're trying to hit
yeah,
it's popping up. And I feel like, counseling, the therapy work sometimes can be that way because life is complicated, life is messy, and so many things creep up, and people, at the same time, you want to be attentive to what's in the room and what people bring to the table. But it sounds really helpful to understand where these maybe deep rooted issues stem from. So you have like an overarching target, right? With the work you're trying to do.